So good evening, everyone, and welcome. Good evening again, and welcome straight in from Great Britain. We're very happy to have you here for the second time in a row, and after the talk coming up 2 weeks since it's the Heart Sutra and Samatha retreat. So Glen, he has quite a long experience in Buddhism, I believe. I don't know how many years, but 20 years. So and he's graduated from an intensive program called the Master's Program in Buddhist Sutra and Tantra, which is a 7-year-long intensive program, including a 1-year retreat. So he really has the basics, in order. we're very fortunate to have him here and teach the Heart Sutra. So thank you very much for coming, Glenn, and yeah, please.
So good evening, everyone, and welcome to CDM, and welcome to this evening on the Heart Sutra. In fact, we're going to be covering the Heart Sutra over 2 evenings, so this evening and next Thursday again. And each of those evenings is 2 hours long, and we're going to have a little 15-minute break in the middle. And in these sessions, we're going to look at the theory behind the Heart Sutra, but we're also going to do a little bit of meditation as well, so a little bit of experience about what the Heart Sutra is all about. Also, I like to be quite interactive in my classes, so at any time, if you're not sure about what I'm talking about, then please ask questions. So I very much encourage that. And just before I start, then make sure you're switched off the mobile phones, because it's a bit embarrassing, particularly in the middle of a meditation, your phone is sort of going off, so just switch those off. Okay, you should all have a copy of the Heart Sutra there, and we're going to be going through that. So we'll start by having a look at the title here. It says, The Heart of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. So first, a sutra, of course, is the words of a Buddha. And the various teachings of the Buddha, the various sutras of the Buddha, were written down historically in 2 languages. Were written down in Pali and Sanskrit. And the sutras that are written down in the Pali language form the basis of the modern day Buddhist traditions, which are referred to as the Theravada traditions. And the Theravada traditions include things like Sri Lankan Buddhism, Thai, Burmese, Cambodia, Laos, through Southeast Asia. And the sutras written down in the Sanskrit language form the basis of what's called now the Mahayana Buddhist traditions. And the Mahayana traditions now include Chinese Buddhism, Zen, Korean, Vietnamese, and of course Tibetan Buddhism. Now, within the Pali tradition, the Theravada tradition, the goal of the spiritual practice is to achieve personal liberation from suffering. And that goal is called, often referred to as nirvana. And in all Buddhist traditions, it's asserted that the underlying reason why we have problems and suffering is because of our fundamental ignorance, our misunderstanding of the nature of reality. And generally in the Pali traditions, the Theravada traditions, they say that the fundamental ignorance that is the root of all of our problems and suffering is that we overinflate a sense of me. We believe the me is more solid than we really are. And so this is what's called grasping onto a self. So in the Theravada traditions, then the wisdom that we need to realize in order to achieve this goal of liberation from suffering, the goal of nirvana, is this wisdom of no self. So they would say that the ignorance that we're suffering from is a false sense of me. We overinflate the sense of me. We grasp onto this, what's called self. And that's what we need to realize, that we do not exist in this overinflated way. So therefore, in the Pali traditions, when they talk about wisdom practice, and another name for wisdom practice is vipassana. Vipassana just means insight, is to gain the realization of this no self. Whereas in the Sanskrit traditions, which are the basis of the Mahayana traditions, the goal of the spiritual path is enlightenment. And enlightenment is not simply to liberate ourselves from suffering, but to achieve the state of full awakening so that we can help to liberate everyone else from suffering as well. And here in the Mahayana traditions, what is stopping us from achieving enlightenment, the fundamental ignorance, is that we believe that there is an independent me here and an independent objective world out there. So this is the ignorance that is said to be the root of all of our suffering within the Sanskrit tradition. So the wisdom we need to develop to achieve enlightenment is what's called the wisdom of emptiness. The wisdom of emptiness, and emptiness in Sanskrit is shunyata. So here we are to realize that there is no independent me, no independent objective world. And this is what emptiness is meaning. And so here the Heart Sutra, as we see, it's part of the Sanskrit tradition, the Mahayana tradition. So here the Heart Sutra is talking about how to cultivate this wisdom here, this wisdom of emptiness. So that's what we're going to be looking at in the Heart Sutra. So just to have a look at the rest of the title, and we see in the title, it says the Heart of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, and then in brackets underneath, we have the original Sanskrit title, which says Arya Bhagavati Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra. So here then we see the word in the middle, Prajna Paramita. Prajna is Sanskrit meaning wisdom, and Paramita means perfection. So Prajna Paramita is the perfection of wisdom. So here, the perfection of wisdom is to realize this emptiness, to realize there's no independent me, no independent objective world. And then after Prajna Paramita, we see the word Hridaya. Hridaya means heart or essence. So that's what's been translated here as heart, as in Heart Sutra. But here the word heart doesn't mean some sort of emotion, it means essence, the heart of the matter, the essence. So this Heart Sutra, it contains the essence of all of the perfection of wisdom teachings in the Sanskrit tradition. So there are many sutras in Sanskrit teaching or talking about emptiness. But the Heart Sutra, the one we're looking at, is the essence of all of those, meaning that the Heart Sutra is the condensed version of all of the perfection of wisdom teachings, meaning in very few words, we have the essence of all of the perfection of wisdom teachings on emptiness. And then we see here the word Arya Bhagavati. Bhagavati is the feminine of Bhagavan. And Bhagavan is just a name, another word for Buddha, someone who's fully enlightened. And Arya is referring to someone who has had a direct realization of emptiness, who has already directly realized nature of reality. But here what we see in the title is we see the feminine version. Bhagavan is male and Bhagavati, the Ti, is feminine. And in Buddhism, wisdom is considered to be feminine, because in the Buddhist spiritual path, we can talk about the two aspects of wisdom and compassion. And actually, intuitively, you may think compassion is more feminine, maybe wisdom more masculine. But actually in Buddhism, it's the opposite. Wisdom is considered to be feminine and compassion masculine. And the reason that wisdom is considered to be feminine in Buddhism is that it's through wisdom that wisdom gives birth to nirvana and enlightenment. Wisdom gives birth to these Arya beings. So that's why wisdom is considered feminine. So this is what we see in the title here, Arya Bhagavati Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra. So this sutra, teaching of the Buddha, is teaching this perfection of wisdom, this wisdom of emptiness, that nothing exists independently. There's no independent me, no independent objective world. And this sutra contains these teachings in very few words. So that's basically the title. Any questions so far? Anything not clear what we're going to be looking at? Okay. What we'll do now, and it's very traditional, is that in many of the Mahayana traditions, the Heart Sutra is very plays a very important role. So much so that in many traditions, you will find that people recite the Heart Sutra on a daily basis. And often, whenever there's a teaching being given, particularly if the teaching is about wisdom, then as a sort of more auspicious sign at the beginning of the teaching, then you would read or recite the Heart Sutra. So before we look at the actual Heart Sutra, I thought it might be nice if we read the Heart Sutra together. So if you'd like to have that handy. And we'll just read through the Heart Sutra together as a starting point. The Heart of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, and we'll read the Sanskrit title as well. It's auspicious to read the Sanskrit title. Arya Bhagavati Prashna Paramita Hridaya Sutra. Thus did I hear at one time, the Bhagavan was dwelling on massive Vulture's mountain in Rajgir, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration of the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. No visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awakened to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequal, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata Om Gati Gati Paragati Parasangati Bodhisvaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration, commanded the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Aryabhakateshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Aryabhakateshvara, those surrounding in their entirety, along the world with gods, humans, Suras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised as spoken by the Bhagavan. Okay, let's see if we can make some sense of all of that. What we see here in this translation of the Heart Sutra is we see a lot of outlines sort of embedded in. Of course, the outlines were not in the original sutra, but these outlines were added at a later time here to sort of more easily see the structure of the Heart Sutra, how the different elements of the Heart Sutra fit together. And so it's this structure that we're going to be following in trying to understand the Heart Sutra. And what we see in the first two outlines here at the top is that the first two paragraphs are what's called the prologue. The prologue is the setting of the sutra. And so very commonly at the beginning of any sutra, you'll find the setting, like where it took place, who was present, and so forth. And so here with the prologue is sort of divided into two parts, what's called common prologue and uncommon prologue. The common prologue is something in common to all the other sutras, is just basically describing a couple of basic elements of the sutra, like when it took place, who the teacher was, where it took place, and who was present. So this is what we find in the first paragraph. It said, thus did I hear at one time. And this is basically saying that this teaching occurred on one occasion. The Buddha only gave this on one occasion. And then it says the Bhagavan. The Bhagavan again here, the Bhagavan is another word for Buddha. So of course, the Buddha here is Buddha Shakyamuni. So the Buddha himself was present, of course. And it says, the Bhagavan was dwelling on massive Vulture's mountain in Rajgir. So Rajgir is a town in now in modern day Bihar in India. And Rajgir literally means the palace of the king. So Rajgir at the time of the Buddha was a place that was actually where the king lived, the king of the whole region. And just outside Rajgir, there's a small hill here called Massive Vulture's Mountain, sometimes called Vulture's Peak. And it's one of the very famous Buddhist pilgrimage sites in India. So of course you can go there now and visit Vulture's Peak and see the place where the Buddha actually gave this teaching. So that was where the teaching took place, on this little hill outside Rajgir. Now it's about a 2-hour drive from Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha, that's the place where the Buddha achieved enlightenment. And it said here, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. So there was a lot of people present, particularly a lot of monks. And here the word monks is really referring to those who are following the path to nirvana. So whereas bodhisattvas here, so there were also bodhisattvas present, and a bodhisattva is someone who's following the path to enlightenment. Of course, we're not saying that all monks only follow the path to nirvana, but here in this setting, that's what this word is referring to, those who are following the path to personal liberation. So that's who's present. The Buddha was present. It was on this little hill, Vulture's Peak outside Rajgir, and there's a lot of monks and a lot of bodhisattvas present. And then in the next paragraph, the uncommon prologue is describing what is unique to this sutra. What is the unique setting of this sutra? And it says here, at that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. So you'll often find in these sorts of sutras, the word profound is a word for emptiness. So because emptiness is something very profound, very difficult to realize. So when it says profound perception here, we're talking about perceiving the profound, and the profound is emptiness. So here we're talking about the fact that the Buddha was absorbed in realizing emptiness, realizing the nature of reality. So that's, the Buddha was sitting there and he was realizing emptiness, the nature of reality. And then it says, also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara. So Avalokiteshvara is the Sanskrit word. In Tibetan, it's Chenrezig, considered to be the Buddha of compassion. But here it's calling Avalokiteshvara a Bodhisattva. So a Bodhisattva, of course, is someone who's aspiring to enlightenment, aspiring to become a Buddha. So even though Avalokiteshvara is the Buddha of compassion, Chenrezig, here he is appearing as a Bodhisattva for the benefit of the audience. He's also being called here a Mahasattva. Mahasattva, Maha means great, Sattva means courage or strength. So a Mahasattva is someone who has great courage or strength. And here it really means someone who has great courage or strength working to help liberate everyone else from suffering. So Avalokiteshvara is also present, and it says here he looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom. So the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, of course, is the practice of emptiness, the practice of realizing nothing exists independently. So Avalokiteshvara was also realizing emptiness. And it says here, and he beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. The 5 aggregates is something that comes up a lot in these teachings. And here the 5 aggregates is a way of presenting the basis of a person. A person has, if we want to keep it simple, a person has 2 parts. We have a body, we have a mind. In the 5 aggregates presentation, the first of the 5 aggregates, as we're going to shortly see, is called the form aggregate. And the form aggregate, with respect to the person, of course, is referring to the body. The other 4 aggregates is collectively the mind. So the mind has been divided into 4 parts, and they are the other 4 aggregates. So when we see here the 5 aggregates, we're talking about the body and the mind of a person. So here he's saying that he beheld those 5 aggregates, i.e. the body and the mind, also as empty of inherent nature. So empty of inherent nature is what we're talking about, emptiness here. So inherent nature is another way of saying things are empty of independent existence. They have no inherent nature. So it's saying here that the body and mind are also empty of inherent nature. So what that is implying is not just the person is empty of inherent nature, but also the basis of the person, the body and the mind, is also empty of inherent nature, i.e. not independently existent. So also Avalokiteshvara was realizing that the person does not independently exist, the body doesn't independently exist, the mind doesn't independently exist. So this is the setting now. Any questions about the setting? Anything not clear about that? So we have the Buddha sitting there realizing emptiness. We have also Avalokiteshvara realizing emptiness. And then if we go to the next part, the actual subject matter of the sutra, we have in the next paragraph, another person is being introduced, is Shariputra. It says here, then through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Avalokiteshvara. So who is Shariputra? I don't know if we have a picture here. Often when you see a picture of the Buddha, you'll see either side 2 disciples standing up. It's a very common way of drawing the Buddha, with 2 disciples, one either side standing up. They're the 2 main disciples of the Buddha. One of those is Shariputra, that's being referred to here. And Shariputra, it says here, then through the power of Buddha, the very Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara. So what we're going to see actually in this sutra, and the sutra is the words of the Buddha, actually in this sutra, what we're going to see, most of the sutra is simply a discussion between Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara. Shariputra is asking a question to Avalokiteshvara, and then most of the sutra is Avalokiteshvara responding, answering to Shariputra. But this is a sutra, the words of the Buddha. And what's key here is this statement, through the power of Buddha. So what does this mean, through the power of Buddha? It means that the Buddha, through the power of his concentration, is actually orchestrating this discussion. So he is actually inspiring Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara to have this discussion through the power of his concentration. So that's what it means, through the power of Buddha. So then Shariputra now asks a question to Avalokiteshvara, and he says, how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? So here he says, any son of the lineage. So what does this word lineage here mean? Here the word lineage is talking about, in general, in practice, we can follow different lineages. And of course, here in the Mahayana, we are following the Mahayana lineage to enlightenment. So a son or daughter of the lineage is someone who's aspiring to follow the Mahayana path. And we become a son or daughter of that lineage when we develop great compassion. So when we develop great compassion, wishing to help liberate everyone else from suffering as well, we are a son or daughter of the Mahayana lineage. So this is what Shariputra is asking, is how should anyone who's interested in following the Mahayana path, who's wishing to follow the Mahayana path, how should they practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? Or in other words, if someone who wants to follow the Mahayana path to enlightenment, how are they to practice this wisdom of emptiness? How are they to go about that? So this is what Shariputra's question is all about. Then we see in Avalokiteshvara's reply, which is most of the rest of the sutra, we can actually see here, it's sort of divided up into sections. And Avalokiteshvara's response in how to practice this wisdom of emptiness can be related to the different stages of the Mahayana path to enlightenment. And actually we can see that in your other handout here, the Mahayana path chart, which we're going to look at in a little bit more detail later and tomorrow, particularly next week on Thursday. So we can see here the Mahayana path, the path to enlightenment, is divided into 5 stages here. We see path of accumulation, path of preparation, path of seeing, path of meditation, path of no more learning. So these are 5 stages we go through on our striving for enlightenment. And Avalokiteshvara's reply here is telling us how to practice this wisdom of emptiness at each one of those 5 stages. And the first part of his answer here is talking about how should we practice this wisdom of emptiness on the first 2 stages of the path, path of accumulation, path of preparation. So that is the section that we're going to look at this evening, is how to practice this wisdom of emptiness on the first 2 stages of the path.
May I ask?
Sure.
Is this the full length of the heart?
The Heart Sutra? Yes.
It's the full length?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So what you find actually is that the Heart Sutra plays a very important role in all of the Mahayana traditions.
Mm-hmm.
And often you'll find in, like, I think in the Chinese and the Zen tradition, when they read the Heart Sutra, we've already gone through this prologue, the setting, and then at the end there's a sort of like a rejoicing at the end. You'll find that in the Chinese and the Zen tradition, those are not part, they only recite the core Heart Sutra. Whereas in the Tibetan tradition, you also have the prologue and the conclusion. But this is the full length of the Heart Sutra. It's 25 stanzas. It's very short, very brief. That's why it's called the Heart Sutra, the essence.
I have another question.
Sure.
This idea about calling the Buddha the Bhagavan, I've also heard him called the Tathagata.
Yeah.
So
And that comes up with
there's three different names for the same guy.
Well, there's much more than three.
Okay.
Much more.
Why would you use those three, or why would you use these two here?
You'll find there are many epitaphs for the Buddha, not just Tathagata, Sugata, Jina, Bhagavan. You can probably find a list of 10 or 15. And each one of those has a particular meaning. What we're going to see at the end of the sutra next week, it talks about Tathagata. You use the Tathagata. Tathagata, gata means to go. Tatata is another word for emptiness. So a Tathagata is someone who's gone to emptiness, meaning someone who's completely realized emptiness fully. So a Buddha is someone who's done that. So that's emphasizing that fact. Bhagavan, Bhagavan can be broken into those two syllables. Van means to possess, and Bhaga can be understood in terms of what's called fortune or qualities. So Bhagavan is someone who possesses particular qualities, and there's a list of 6 qualities which we won't go into, but often the word Bhagavan can mean someone who's possessing these qualities of a Buddha, and it also can mean someone who's eliminated all the faults as well. So there is etymology with all of this. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Okay. So then let's have a look at Avalokiteshvara's reply. So what we're going to be covering this evening is the first part of his reply, which relates to how are we to practice this wisdom of emptiness on the first 2 stages of the path, which actually implicitly is also talking about how are we as beginners, because maybe we're not at even here, you know, maybe we're somewhere back here, you know, and so we might think, oh, well, we're not even anywhere near here yet, so this doesn't apply to us. But actually, the first part of the answer is applying to us as well, because to actually enter the path of accumulation, you have to develop this aspiration called bodhicitta, this aspiration for enlightenment, to a level where it's like something spontaneous within us. So maybe we don't have this spontaneous wish to achieve enlightenment to help others. Maybe we don't have that now, something we have to work on a little bit. So maybe we're sort of back here somewhere. But actually the instructions that we see now in the Heart Sutra also relates to us as beginners. So it's the very same instruction. So they definitely apply to us. There's a question?
Oh, just about, you said, so his reply refers to the 2 first stages. Is
the
that
first part of the reply,
yeah,
which we're going to look at this evening.
So that's the part of accumulation and the part of preparation. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what we're going to be looking at this evening. And then the last 3 stages of the path we're looking at next week.
So, something else. So emptiness has nothing to do with enlightenment. It's just a method.
Nothing to do with enlightenment. As we're going to see, emptiness, of course, is saying that everything's empty of inherent existence. And in the Mahayana tradition, if we want to achieve enlightenment, we have to come to realize that directly. If we realize emptiness directly, again and again and again and again and again, eventually we'll wipe out all the ignorance in our mind, and then we'll achieve enlightenment. So someone who's in an enlightened state is realizing emptiness all the time. So that's the relationship between enlightenment and emptiness.
So enlightenment is the emptiness of emptiness.
No, enlightenment is someone who has fully a tathagata, someone who's fully realized emptiness.
Cool.
Yeah.
Does the mind that realizes emptiness, is that same or different from the emptiness that it realizes?
Same or different? Neither. Okay. And we'll hopefully a little bit touch on that point this evening. Okay. So let's have a look at the first part of the answer. So the first part is just a transition from the question to the answer. In the next paragraph, it says, he said that And the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Aryavalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this. So Avalokiteshvara is saying, Shariputra, any son or daughter of the lineage, so remember here, a son or daughter of the lineage is someone who's developed great compassion and is aspiring to follow the Mahayana path to enlightenment. Someone who has that aspiration, how should they practice this wisdom of emptiness, the perfection of wisdom? So the first part of the answer is the brief answer. And the very brief answer is correctly and repeatedly beholding those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. So here, correctly and repeatedly, actually you can, this word repeatedly can be also translated from Sanskrit as subsequently. So this can also be translated into English as instead of correctly and repeatedly beholding, and it makes more sense to translate it as to subsequently see in a correct way that the 5 aggregates are also empty of inherent nature. So what does it mean to subsequently see in a correct way? It means to subsequently to investigating, we come to realize or we come to see that things are empty of inherent nature. What that implies is that to come to initially realizing emptiness, we have to use reasoning and logic. We have to come to infer that actually things are empty in independent existence. Because emptiness is not something that we can see directly now. So we have to use reasoning and logic to come to correctly infer that, yes, things are empty of inherent existence. They do not exist independently. And so that's what we're going to be doing here in trying to establish this view of emptiness, is use reasoning and logic to really come to correctly see in a correct way that things are empty of inherent nature, empty of inherent existence. And again, here in the answer, it says to behold those 5 aggregates. So remember, the 5 aggregates is simply a way of saying body and mind. The body and mind are also empty of inherent nature, meaning not just the person, but the basis of the person, the body and the mind, also are empty of inherent nature. They do not independently exist. So in the brief answer, it's also indicating the sequence where we should investigate the nature of reality. When we come to investigate the nature of reality, we can investigate anything. We can investigate this cup, the laptop, the body, the mind. But here, what it's implying is that we should start to investigate ourselves as a person. How do I exist? And so we are to use reasoning and logic to come to correctly see, to subsequently see in a correct way that we, the person, do not exist independently. There's no independent me here. So this is what this brief answer is telling us on what to do. And to go into that, we're going to go into that after the break in the most classic statements of the Heart Sutra, in the next sentence where it says, form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. So that's probably the most well-known part of the Heart Sutra. And in there's a lot of meaning, and in there it really tells us what this emptiness really means. What does it mean that things are empty of independent nature or independent existence? So what we're going to do now before we stop for a short tea break is, as suggested in the Heart Sutra here, that we begin our investigation in the nature of reality by focusing on ourselves as a person. So what we're going to do now is use reasoning and logic in meditation to come to see, and subsequently in a correct way, that there is no independent me here. So that's what we're going to do now. So let's do a short meditation on that point. So just finding yourself a nice, comfortable posture. So we can begin by allowing your awareness to descend into your body and simply become aware of sensations throughout the body. And if you notice any areas of tightness or tension in any part of the body, then use the out breath to relax and release that tightness or tension. And bring your awareness to the area of your face, softening and relaxing all the muscles in the face. Mouth and jaw soft and relaxed. And all the muscles around the eyes soft and relaxed. In this way, allowing your entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. And relaxing more deeply with each out breath. Allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. Not trying to control or regulate the breath in any way. Simply allowing it to flow naturally and effortlessly. And with each out breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen. Happily releasing them. and simply allow the mind to come to rest in the present moment. Simply becoming aware of sensations of the breath throughout the body. Wherever you most easily notice any sensations associated with the breath. And maintain an ongoing flow of mindfulness on the sensations of the breath throughout the body. Now, do you have a sense that there is a me here who is meditating? A me that does not seem to depend upon anything else to exist. Do you have this experience? This experience of me, the meditator. The me who seems to be here meditating, can this me be found anywhere? Can me, the meditator, be found anywhere within the body? So search thoroughly every part of the body and look for the me who is meditating. Is the me who is meditating to be found somewhere inside the head? Is the brain the me who is meditating? Or is the brain simply something which I possess? Something which me, the meditator, is using? Is the whole body itself, is that the me who is meditating? Or is the whole body itself simply something which I possess, something which me, the meditator, is trying to relax? Is me, the meditator, to be found anywhere within the mind? So again, search thoroughly every part of the mind and look for the me who is meditating. Are any of the thoughts, emotions, or memories in the mind, are any of these the me who is meditating? Or are thoughts, emotions, and memories simply things which I possess, things which me, the meditator, has? Is the mind itself the me who is meditating? Or is the mind itself simply something which I possess, something which me, the meditator, is trying to train? Is the combination of the body and the mind, is that the me who is meditating here? Or is the combination of the body and the mind simply two things which I possess, two things which me, the meditator, is trying to train? But apart from the body and the mind, what else is there here? If there's nothing more than the body and the mind here, then where is the me who possesses this body and mind, who is trying to train this body and the mind? Where is the me who is meditating? Even if you didn't find the me who is meditating, isn't there someone who's experiencing all of this? So there is a me here meditating. But just because we don't seem to be able to find it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It simply means it's empty of findable, independent existence. The me who is here meditating is the dependent me, a me that exists depending on the body and the mind, a me that is merely labelled on the basis of the body and the mind. So the dependent me can now finish this meditation and have a cup of tea. So let's take a 15-minute break before we come back and really have a look at this most famous part of the Heart Sutra. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. So we're going to try and unpack the meaning in that for the rest of this evening. So first a cup of tea before we launch into that. Someone was trying to Skype us, were they?
Yeah. They had a question about the nature of emptiness.
Someone heard and they were
Exactly.
Just close Skype. Close Skype. No, you just didn't close Skype.
Someone tried to
No,
say you.
no, the app is closed.
So, you will still have to agree with you.
yeah, tomorrow lunch, isn't it? We're having lunch.
Yeah, exactly.
Somewhere on the bike.
It's not been
So we're looking here at the Heart Sutra, and the Heart Sutra contains, again, the word heart means essence, the essence of the Perfection of Wisdom sutras. Perfection of Wisdom was this wisdom of emptiness. So this Heart Sutra contains the essence of the teachings on emptiness. And we're just starting to have a look at Avalokiteshvara's response to Shariputra in terms of how to practice this wisdom of emptiness in the various stages along the Mahayana path to enlightenment. And what we saw was that in the initial stages of the path, emptiness is something that we need to come to realize through using reasoning and logic, inference, to, as we saw here, to subsequently see in a correct way that everything's empty of independent existence. And so we're now going to have a look at this famous statement here in the Heart Sutra: form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. So let's have a look at what these statements mean. So we see the first statement, form is empty. So remember, form here is one of the five aggregates. The five aggregates is the presentation of the basis of the person. So the form aggregate here is really talking about the body. So effectively what the statement is saying is the body is empty. But when we see statements like the body is empty, we have to say empty of what? And here, emptiness doesn't mean nothing really exists. This is not saying the body is empty, therefore it doesn't really exist. What it's saying is the form is empty, or the body is empty of inherent nature, or in other words, empty of independent existence. So this statement that things are empty of independent existence, or another way of saying independent existence is empty of inherent nature, inherent existence, this is emptiness. So emptiness is not saying nothing really exists. Emptiness is saying things are not independently existent. So this is the ultimate nature of form, or the body. In fact, as we see in the Heart Sutra, emptiness is the ultimate nature of everything. Everything, nothing exists independently. Everything's empty of independent existence. And as we saw initially, to come to realize this, we come at it by using reasoning and logic. And that's a little bit the approach we used in that meditation we just did. In that meditation, of course, we weren't looking for the body, we were looking at the me that was here meditating. And so one type of reasoning, and there are different types of reasoning we can use. The one we used in that meditation was basically the reasoning of what's called same or different. Because if something exists independently, it must be findable. We must be able to point and say, there it is. So in terms of here, in terms of the person, the reasoning we can use is this: if there is an independent me here, that independent me has got to be found as either being the same as the body and the mind, or different than the body and the mind. And if we can't find it in one of those two places, the independent findable me does not exist. So that's what we did. This approach is what we did in the meditation. First, we were looking, is the me that seems to be here, is it the same as the body and the mind? Can you find the me in the body? Can you find the me in the mind? If we can't find the me in the body and the mind, then it must be different than the body and the mind. And there you must be able to take away the body and the mind and be left with the me. And if you can't, then it's not findable. That's the reasoning. And therefore, if you can't find that me as either being the same or different than the body and the mind, that not finding the me is an experience of emptiness. So we just hold that experience of not finding. So here, it's often said that not finding is the best finding. And so that's what emptiness in the meditation, the experience of emptiness is this experience of not finding, having searched thoroughly. So that's the approach we used. So therefore, whether you're looking for the body, the person, the mind, then if we use this sort of reasoning, we can come to that experience of not finding that independent me, and that experience of not finding is an experience of emptiness. So that is how we can come to an experience of emptiness initially at our stage and here on the first stage of the first two stages of the spiritual path, of the Mahayana path. But often when we look at this statement, form is empty, then people often feel, oh, form is empty, it doesn't really exist. So often what happens is we fall to the extreme of nihilism, misinterpreting what this statement means. To help avoid falling to the extreme of nihilism, misinterpreting that, oh, it's empty, it doesn't really exist, we have the second statement, which is emptiness is form. So what this is saying, emptiness is form, is what it's really saying is that because things are empty of independent existence, therefore form, the body and the person and so forth, can appear and functions. So what this is saying is that because of emptiness, we can have form, the body, the person and so forth. So this is talking about the subtle conventional nature of everything. In this case, of course, we're talking about the body. So emptiness is form, or emptiness is the body, is saying because the body is empty of independent existence, the body can appear, it can function. So what it's really saying here is that the form or the body is a dependent phenomena. So this is talking about the conventional nature of everything, that in fact everything is a dependent arising. So this, and as we're going to see in the next two statements a little bit later, emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness, meaning that emptiness and the fact that things are dependent are like two sides of a coin. And so often the reasoning there that we see is that in general things are empty is that things are empty of independent existence. So again, this is emptiness. Why? Because they are dependently existent. And the technical word for that is dependent arisings. So often the statement we see tying these two ideas together is that things are empty of independent existence. They're not independently existent because they are dependently existent. So this is the word dependent arising. Arising here means coming into existence. So things come into existence dependently. So therefore, if we can understand how things are dependently existent, we'll understand why they're empty of independent existence. So that's going to help us better understand emptiness. So that's what we're going to look at now, is how are things dependently existent? In other words, because emptiness is form, how is form, or anything dependent arising. So that's what we're going to look at now. And by understanding this, that'll help us better understand emptiness. So the first way in which things are dependent is they depend on causes and conditions. For example, to have this laptop here existing, we need lots of causes and conditions. One of the first conditions we needed, of course, is someone needed to design this laptop. Then, of course, we needed all the raw materials to be collected, refined. We needed all the various components to be manufactured, and then we needed all of that stuff to be assembled. So, and then of course we needed all the people and factories involved in all that as well. So without all of those causes and conditions, we wouldn't have this laptop here now. So I think that's fairly easy to understand, that things depend on causes and conditions. This is something very well understood in science, of course. But also, of course, things depend on their parts. Again, this laptop, you know, without the casing, without the buttons, all the electronic components, the screen, without all of these parts here, we wouldn't have a laptop. So again, I think that's fairly straightforward, is that things depend on their parts to exist. So I think all of us here can quite happily accept these two ideas. True? Straightforward. But remember, what we're saying is that because things are dependently arising, that is a reason that would make that things are empty of independent existence. But I think we can all happily accept that this laptop exists depending on causes and conditions of parts, but probably most of us are also happy to accept that when we walk in the door here, there's already a laptop sitting here on the table. True or not? But this reasoning should be overturning that idea. That reasoning should be stopping us from understanding or believing that there is a laptop already existing here on the table when we walk in the door. But it doesn't seem to have that effect, I think. Why? Because we don't really understand these ideas at a very deep level. We only understand them very superficially. So to understand these at a deeper level, we have to go to the third way in which things are dependent. That things exist depending on imputation, labeling, conception. So these are all three different words for the same thing. So if you understand one of these words, you understand them all. So what does it mean for things to exist depending on imputation, labeling, or conception? So again, we look at that and we might think, oh, I think I know what that means. It means there's a thing here that we're calling a laptop. Again, that's fairly superficial understanding of what this really means. To really understand what that means is we can understand that when we look out on the world, what's appearing to us, of course, is just a mass of sense data, particularly visual data. And of course, we have to make sense or meaning out of all of this data, otherwise we couldn't function. So what do? Is we create objects. We draw lines around various collections of data and create an object. So we divide up the world into many objects because we have to do that to make sense of this. But we do more than that because we need to communicate, so we have to give names to these things that we've created so that we can communicate. So this third point is that whole process whereby we draw lines, create objects, and then give a name on top of that. The way in which we divide up the world is not fixed. It's completely arbitrary, depending on the meaning that we want to get from the world. For example, how many things are there? How many things are there? Don't we decide? Is there one thing there from its own side, a star, existing independent of our conception? Is there one thing there when we come along? Or do we create perhaps one thing by drawing a line around there and saying, oh, there's one star there? Or we may do a different way of drawing lines and we go, oh, actually there's 2 triangles there. Or we may do another way, we may say, oh, actually there's 6 triangles there. Or another way, there's 6 triangles and a hexagon. Or there's a collection of 18 lines there. So how many objects are there? Is there 1, 2, 6, 7, or 18? How many objects are there? We decide. We create the objects. There's not an object there existing independently of our conceptual framework. We create the objects. We need to do that, of course, because we have to make sense or meaning. We couldn't function. So there's nothing wrong with doing that. We have to do that. The problem is we don't realize we're doing that. The problem is we believe there's already a fixed world of many discrete objects already there before we come along. That's the problem. That's where we're out of sync with reality. So therefore, what we're saying is here is you'll often hear this term that things are merely labeled. Meaning that things do not exist more than within our conceptual framework. There's nothing existing beyond our conceptual framework. That things are merely just only labeled, only existing within our conceptual framework. So this is what the third point means, which means another way of saying this is that things are not findable. You cannot find a star here in the basis. There's no star to be found in the basis in that data. We create the star. So often another way that you'll see the term is things are not findable, meaning there's no star to be found here within the basis from its own side. Okay, based on this understanding, let's now have a look at how we can understand these 2 ideas at a deeper level. So this is a timeline. This is the seed, and this is the plant that it produces. So we saw back there that the plant exists depending on causes and conditions. The underlying cause for the plant, of course, is the seed, and the conditions necessary to have the plant, of course, is the soil, sunlight, water, and so forth. So without the seed and all of those conditions, we wouldn't have the plant. So the plant exists depending on the causes and conditions. Now, we believe that things like seed and plant exist independently, independent of our conceptual framework. If that's the case, at what point does the seed become the plant? If seeds and plants exist from their own side, it should be a fixed, obvious point where the seed becomes the plant. So where does the seed become the plant in this timeline? Who can tell me? Where does the seed become the plant?
When you decide to make it a plant.
Exactly. So the seed becomes a plant when, only when, this configuration of data stops looking like our concept of seed and starts looking like our concept of plant. And each one of us have slightly different concepts of what a seed and a plant is. Therefore, for some of us, maybe that's where the seed becomes the plant. For some of us, it could be here. Some of us could be here. We determine when the plant comes into existence. There's no plant existing from its own side. Another point that can be very helpful with this is we say that the seed and plant are in a cause and effect relationship. And by definition, if two things are in a cause and effect relationship, they cannot exist at the same time, by definition. So here's the question. Does the seed cease existing before the plant comes into existence? So again, you've got to think about it clearly. Does the seed stop existing before the plant comes into existence? There can only be two answers, yes or no. Which is it? No. If you say no, it means that seed exists at the same time as the plant. By definition, that is illogical. So no is illogical. You cannot use no as an answer. It's illogical if two things in a cause-effect relationship. If you say yes, the seed has ceased to exist, where's the plant coming from? The seed ceased to exist, where's the plant coming from? So what we can understand from this logic is that cause and effect, if we believe that things exist independently, a thing like cause and effect becomes completely illogical. It cannot work. It cannot work. And actually, the great Indian master Nagarjuna, who really expanded on this perfection of wisdom teachings, he wrote a classic text in Sanskrit called Mula Madhyamika Karika, the fundamental wisdom of the middle way. And in his classic text, he uses 27 chapters of arguments like this. You believe in independent existence? What about seed and plant, cause and result, agent and action, fire and fuel? How do these things work? And then it just becomes illogical. All these common sense ideas we have, if we believe in independent existence, become completely illogical. They cannot work. So this is another way of breaking down this false view that things exist independently. Another part of the question here.
Yeah, I think you could argue that this is just to do with our like the mental events of how we conceptualize the world, and has nothing to do with the nature of the world. So that it doesn't really matter which words we use to describe.
But the only world we can talk about is the world we experience, correct?
Yeah.
And the world we experience is a world that we create, isn't it?
Well, we create it from some basis, right? Like we conceptualize it, right?
Correct.
But
correct.
from this, there's some basis.
There's a basis, but isn't okay? But isn't basis a concept that we've developed? Isn't atom a concept that we've developed to try and understand things? Isn't it? Is there an atom existing independent of our conceptual framework?
I wouldn't go as far.
Huh?
I wouldn't say so.
No, well, that's what we're saying. So the tricky point here, and that's what we're going to see a lot next week, is that for us now, there's just two possibilities. There's two options. And we're stuck in what's called the two extremes. The first extreme is called the extreme of existence, meaning independent existence. So that's where we're stuck now. We believe this. And for us now, there's only two possibilities. Either there is this independent world or there's no world, because we cannot see any other possibility, because the only world that we've identified with is this. So this idea of emptiness is undermining this. Through using reasoning and logic, we can come to correctly establish there is no independent world. It just does not exist. It's illogical, in fact. But then when people do this, they then wrongly assume that not finding this, they flip to the other extreme. And the other extreme, of course, is the extreme of non-existence or nihilism, is that by correctly using reasoning and logic, correctly understanding this is just can't exist, we flip to the other extreme because we think there's only two possibilities. Either there is this independent world or there's no world. So then we often flip to this extreme. And this is what the Heart Sutra and what Nagarjuna was all about. Madhyamika means middle way. We're trying to find the middle way between these two extremes. And that's what this statement is talking about. Particularly, emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. Because emptiness helps us to overcome this extreme. Emptiness helps us to understand that things are not independent. And dependent arising helps us to overcome nihilism. Things do exist, they're dependently existent, they're merely labeled, helps us to overcome nihilism. And so understanding that emptiness and dependent arising, you know, emptiness is not other than form, form is also not, it's like two sides of a coin. So by understanding those statements, it really does help us to find that middle way between those two extremes. And that is the real challenge here, is to really find that middle way. Because as you said, you know, for us now, we demand there must be a basis there for something to exist. There has to be a basis there for something to exist, because we can't entertain the possibility of anything existing without an independent basis. But that's only because we're stuck in these two extremes. So that's what we're trying to overcome.
It seems that when I've been listening to you talk and talk and talk and talk, and it seems to me one of the problems with this is actually we're caught up in words. And even when we're thoughts, it's words. So we've got these definitions, thoughts, and they seem to have dependent, they seem to, if there was no explanation about words, then we're left basically with what actually happens, yeah? That we didn't have to, the problem is communicating this, which is not communicating. Well, in my head, listening to my thoughts that are going around, I'm not communicating to you, so I'm just listening. I'm actually already limiting what I'm experiencing, because I'm already thinking about it, which is thoughts and basically everything else. If I could get rid of these conceptual ideas, which are based on thought, then what happens?
Then you couldn't function. See,
because I would still be here.
But you couldn't function because nothing would have meaning.
Everything would have meaning, because everything is then possible.
See, we have to be very careful here in that, and this is what's called the pre-trans fallacy in philosophy, is that people want to go back before conception. But what we need to do is go forward, use conception to go forward, not to regress back. So what we need to do, the problem is not conception. The problem is we don't understand conception. Because what we're saying here is that emptiness is not other than form, or form is not other than emptiness. What we're saying is that dependency, things that merely labeled, is the meaning of emptiness. It's not like they're in contradiction and we have to get rid of. So it's not like there's emptiness and then there's conception, and conception's a problem. We get rid of that, we get to emptiness. We're stuck in the duality. What we need to understand is they're two sides of a coin.
But I think
it's just a word. That's conception and emptiness is just a word.
Yeah, but the
thing
is, what we have to understand is that not understanding conception is the problem. Not understanding what that really means. That's the problem.
But it's an intellectual understanding.
Correct.
You want to understand everything in words.
Correct. Therefore, so what we need to do to go forward with conception is you need to come to realize emptiness directly.
Yeah.
Then directly you'll understand conception, not the way we do now. So you're right in that you're never going to be able to figure out this conceptually. But the solution is not to abandon conception. The solution is to use conception to go beyond. Because if you don't have a framework, then what are you going to do? It's not like blanking your mind is not going to be the solution. Blanking your mind of conceptual thought is not going to get you anywhere except in a stupor
So it's a kind of
In a stupa?
awakening. Awakening.
Drunken,
Words
drunken
is
state.
kind of awakening.
Drunken
in
state.
words.
Not in a stupa.
Stupor.
In a stupa, okay. Yeah.
Stupor. So you have to use words to go beyond it. It's like the analogy often is sticks. Rubbing two sticks together, you burn them. So what we're doing here is using conceptual framework to understand where to go. But then you have to go beyond that. You can't, it's like the analogy is that, you know, in the Buddhism, you got the boat to cross the river, but once you cross the river, you leave the boat behind.
Yeah.
So you use conception to go beyond conception. If you abandon it from the beginning, you've got no vehicle, no tool to help you to start to go beyond. You'll just get stuck in a blank state. So this is the trick, is to know how to use it to go beyond.
Because it's something we have forgotten. Kind of
Forgotten.
Yeah,
Well, Yeah.
What do you mean when you use the words realizing directly?
That's going to be next week. So what we're looking at now is the first two stages of the path accumulation, preparation, but also for us as a beginner. So as a beginner, we approach emptiness through using reasoning and logic, using conceptual framework, inference, to come to conceptually realize emptiness as a starting point. But then we have to go deeper. And so this is going to, I think, be the answer to the question as well, is that you use that as the starting point to go beyond, to end up to come to directly realizing emptiness. And that's what's going to happen at the next stage of the path of seeing, which is the topic for next week. So that's what I'm saying is here you need to use reasoning and logic and conception as the vehicle to start this, because otherwise, see the problem is as well is you don't have that. You may sit down and you may have some sort of non-conceptual state, but how do you interpret that? Because not every non-conceptual state is a realization of emptiness. In fact, it could be just spacing out. You know, you can space out well in a non-conceptual state. You can stop conception, but that's not understanding anything. Stopping conception. What we need to do is to realize emptiness. And to realize emptiness, we need to have a framework for practice. And that, of course, is a conceptual framework. And so that's where we start, with that conceptual framework, so that we know where we're headed. And then we know if we have some experience, we can correctly interpret that, whether it's a valid experience or whether we're just spacing out and not really going anywhere. Because that's the thing, is that many people, you know, believe that, oh, the goal is beyond conception. So that at the start, they just blank their minds and they sit in a blank state. And often they think, oh, I'm realizing emptiness, you know. And then they just delude themselves because they're just in this spaced out state. And this is one of the dangers too, is that, you know, what we're talking about here is the wisdom practice, or in other words, vipassana practice. As a basis for that, we have what's called the shamatha practice. Shamatha practice is just to develop a stable, clear mind. In that practice, the conceptual mind goes completely quiet. And then when that happens, people who don't have this conceptual framework, they have this non-conceptual state, and then they delude themselves thinking, oh, I've realized nature of reality because I had a non-conceptual mind. And then they don't go anywhere except get very delusional, believing that they've achieved enlightenment now and sort not really gone anywhere. They have not gone 1 millimeter on the Mahayana path, in fact. To go there, you need vipassana practice. And so this is the starting point of that. It's very important. Otherwise, we can have all sorts of strange ideas. But yes, I mean, we need to go beyond conception, of course, and that's the third stage we're coming up to, is that now, see, even at these two stages of the path, if we sit down and do this meditation, and we have this experience of not finding the me or whatever we're searching for, then there's still a sense of me, the meditator, realizing or having this experience of not finding. So that's still a conceptual experience, but it's a valid experience. It's a valid experience, but still conceptual, because there's still a sense of me, the meditator, realizing this thing emptiness. But then we have to go one step further and go deeper to a point where it becomes completely non-conceptual, that experience. But that's next week's topic. Okay, just a couple more things before we wrap up today. So this is in terms of causes and conditions, understanding. The other one is in terms of parts. We say, for example, this pen exists depending on its parts. And it's not findable. There's no pen to be found here in the basis. And we can sort of highlight that. We can see that quite easily, because if we search for the pen here, is there a pen to be found in the basis? Is this a pen? No. Is this a pen? No. Is this tube a pen? No. Is this plastic tube a pen? No. Is the ink a pen? No. Is the metal ball on the end a pen? No. Where's the pen? And then people go, oh, that's easy. It's the collection of that stuff is the pen. So here's the collection. Is that a pen? Oh, no, no, no. It has to be in a certain shape. Okay, you have to tell me when the pen comes into existence. No? No? Anyone?
No.
Oh, what about that?
Not necessary.
Not
useful.
necessary. Before it was necessary, but not now.
No, it's about the use.
Exactly. So we bring the pen into existence when this configuration of data closely enough resembles our concept of pen, and our concepts generally have at least two parts, appearance and functionality. So when this collection appears closely enough to our concept of pen, and it seems to function according to our concept of pen, then there's a pen, not before. Because if a pen exists from its own side, if there's a pen to be found here, it would mean that everyone who looked here would see pen. But I think if a caveman walked in here, they wouldn't see pen. They'd probably see some sort of weapon for stabbing. And then, of course, if a dog came in here, they'd probably see some sort of chewing stick. And if a tiny ant came here, they may see some home to live in. So is this a pen, a weapon, a chewing stick, or a home? From its own side, none of those. From the side of the observer, all of those things. So we bring the pen into existence. So there's a big difference, but see, this is the problem, is that we have a label and we have the basis. What we do is we fuse the two together. Don't we say this is a pen? Technically, that's very misleading, isn't it? Shouldn't we be saying pen is something I'm labeling on this basis? Aren't we applying the label pen to this basis? When we point and say this is a pen, we're saying the label is the basis. That's a big problem. The label is not the basis. Because another problem with this is the basis is something that's always changing, right? The label pen, does that change? But if you stick it to the object, then you get some solid, unchanging thing, pen. So even our language gets us into trouble. The way we speak gets us into trouble. So what we need to understand is that the pen is not the collection of the parts. There's no pen to be found here. Pen is merely labeled depending on the collection of parts. So if you can understand those two statements are not saying the same thing, you're beginning to understand something about emptiness. So the two statements is the pen is the collection of the parts versus pen is merely labeled depending on the collection of the parts. Big difference. Likewise, this is not person. The person is not the body and the mind. Person is something merely labeled depending on the body and the mind. Big difference. Big difference. But what do we grasp onto? The person is the body and the mind. This is me. This is the person. That's the problem. And one last point, and then we'll finish this evening, is to also help us understand this idea of emptiness dependent arising. Often there are many analogies given in Buddhism when this is presented. One analogy that I like and I think can be very helpful is the analogy of a dream. Now, of course, when we're dreaming, in the dream, there appears to be a dream me here, and there appears to be an independent dream world out there. And in the dream, if we encounter something pleasant or unpleasant in the dream, often we have a lot of craving and attachment for the pleasant things, a lot of aversion, fear, and anxiety for the unpleasant things. But if in the middle of the dream, suddenly we realize, oh, this is a dream, i.e. lucid dreaming, then there still will appear to be an independent me here, and there still will appear to be an independent dream world out there. But because we're lucid now, we'll realize that this appearance is deceiving us. We'll realize that this appearance is a product of our mind. Therefore, if we now, while we're lucid, encounter something pleasant or unpleasant in the dream, it would be very difficult to develop any attachment, aversion, fear, anxiety, and we would enjoy the dream a hell of a lot more. Likewise, this view of emptiness is saying things are like a dream. Meaning now, in the waking world, there appears to be an independent me here, there appears to be an independent world out there. And therefore, and we believe in that, therefore, when we encounter something pleasant or unpleasant, we often have a lot of attachment to the pleasant things, a lot of aversion to unpleasant things. But if we wake up from our sleep of ignorance by realizing emptiness, if we become lucid in the waking state by realizing emptiness, there still will appear to be an independent me here and an independent world there. But because we're lucid now, we'll realize these appearances are deceiving us, that this world of appearance is also a product of our mind. And therefore, if we encounter things that are pleasant or unpleasant, it would become very difficult to develop any attachment or aversion, and we would enjoy our waking life a hell of a lot more. So this is a good analogy that I think is very helpful in trying to understand emptiness dependent arising. Any last question? Otherwise, we'll finish up there for this week. Last point anyone would like to bring up? Okay, we'll leave it there. So next Thursday, we're going to continue with the Heart Sutra. We're going to talk about the last 3 stages of the path of seeing, path of meditation, path of no more learning. And here we're going to start to then look at moving from this sort of conceptual realization of emptiness based on reasoning and logic to moving into deeper, to a direct realization of emptiness, a non-conceptual realization of emptiness, and how that will enable us to then eventually achieve the goal of enlightenment. So that's for next Thursday night. Until then, sleep well. Sleep well. Enjoy your week. See you next Thursday.
Thank you. So I just wanted to mention that Glen is also teaching tomorrow night. There'll be an introduction to the shamatha practice. And in the weekend there'll be a retreat with the shamatha retreat. So so there'll be teachings and a lot of meditation too. And also next weekend it will be the same structure, just with the vipassana practice, which he also mentioned. And then lastly, as you know, the center runs completely on donations, so we very much appreciate if you give a little donation, or big donation if you want. But this is not for the Dharma is free, but of course it costs money to run this place. So so yeah, if you can afford anything, then it's appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.